Hello and welcome. Welcome to Anne Cleeves, our special guest today, who's the author of The Raging Storm, the book that we'll be going to talk about. And we'll be dealing with a lot of questions. You sent in over 30 questions. We'll try to get through as many of those as we can before our time is up today. A few words about myself. My name's Martin Edwards. I'm the author of The Lake District Mysteries and the Rachel Savonay Mysteries. The most recent book in the Rachel series is called The Puzzle of Blackstone Lodge. And I've also written a history of crime fiction called The Life of Crime. But we're here today to talk about Anne. And Anne is the author of 37 novels. I think that's right. I counted them the other day. I think it's 37 now. And it started some time ago with this book, A Bird in the Hand, the very first edition of the first book, which was published way back in 1986 when Anne was only about 19 or something like that.
Yeah, very flattering, Martin.
I read that and I reviewed it and I loved it. And I've loved all the other books that Anne has written ever since. Before we start with the questions, just a few words about her background. 6 years ago, she won the highest honour in UK crime writing, the Crime Writers Association Diamond Dagger, which I had the privilege and the pleasure of presenting to her. It was a great moment. She's got 3 series of particular note these days. There's the Vera series, which has been televised, starring Brenda Blethyn. There is the Shetland series, which has been televised and is still running. And there is now the North Devon series. And that became a TV series called The Long Call. So quite amazing, 3 primetime television series. So welcome, Anne, and congratulations on your latest bestseller, The Raging Storm.
Thanks very much. I think crime writers all over the UK have little wax models and stick pins in me every night because I've been so lucky with TV adaptations.
Well, as you know, I believed in your books many years ago, and it's been wonderful to see the success that you've achieved because it genuinely is well deserved. I don't think anybody in the crime writing world could possibly deny that. So, without more ado, let's plunge into talking about the Raging Storm. It's the 3rd book in this series featuring Detective Matthew Venn, and it's set in North Devon. So my first question, Anne, is why North Devon?
I had my childhood in North Devon. I moved there when I was 11, fell in love with the place and stayed there really until I left home. And people had said to me before, you ought to set a book in Devon. But I think before I'd had a kind of tourist's view of it, that it was a place where cozy crime would be set. And although I write traditional mysteries, I don't think I write cozy books because people have an image of thatched cottages and cream teas and beaches. And it was only when I went back quite recently to stay with a school friend of mine, my husband had died very suddenly. And I wanted to run away, not from the memories of Tim, but from other people's pity, really. I wanted to go and ran back to a place where I'd been very happy, which is North Devon, and stayed with a very good friend, an old school friend of mine. And just we went walking and talking, but it was winter and there were no tourists and it was grey and bleak and the wind was blowing. And it then occurred to me that this would be a good place to set a book. My friend had grown up in a very closed evangelical community. And we talked a bit about that, about what that would be like and how she managed that as a child. And it seemed to me that if somebody had grown up with those sort of certainties and lost their faith in their late teens, early 20s, as lots of people do, the world would seem a very chaotic and unanchored place for them. And that they might join the police service as a way of refinding that sense of duty and honour and family and companionship. And so that really was how Matthew then developed. But then the people who'd looked after me after Tim died, who scooped me up out of hospital, and my daughters live locally, but they were grieving too because it was a very sudden death. But and the people that helped me and still now 5 years later are still looking after me are a gay couple, Martin and Paul. And so they were very much in my head when I was down in Devon. And that's really how Matthew became gay, I think, because, and I think he was always meant to be, but I hadn't realized until I had these friends with me.
Yes, it's a fascinating origin story, really, isn't it? The way you came up with that character and developed him, and of course those issues, his religious upbringing, and the fact that he's gay. He's happily married to Jonathan. These are strong background features in the Raging Storm as well as the earlier books, aren't they?
Yeah, I think so. It's set in a little village. I wanted to set it somewhere that, again, that wasn't the classic Devon background. So the village where it's set is almost industrial. There's a big quarry that's been worked out and a row of terraced houses that come down to the harbour. And that grew out of, I was lucky enough to be invited on set when they were filming The Long Call. And they were filming at a place called Hartland Quay. And it's grey and it's dark and it has these great granite cliffs. And it was blowing a hoolie and it was raining. And these poor actors, they were filming a sea baptism. So Martin Shaw, the actor, was there dunking this poor lass into the water. And after every take, they'd run out and be wrapped up with blankets and hot water bottles. And it was fairly grim. And so really that developed the place. So it's a place called Greystone. And it has memories for Matthew because he used to go there as a child. It was and still is a community of the brethren that he grew up with lived there.
Mm-hmm. And it's beautifully evoked in the book, as are the surrounding places nearby, near the coast. And you also, almost at the start of the story, have a scene with a lifeboat crew. Could you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, well, my husband Tim, I'm very grateful to the RNLI, our lifeboat service. When we were first married, we lived not very far from where you live now, Martin, on a tiny island called Hilbury in the Dee estuary. We were the only people living there. Tim was warden of the little nature reserve there, and there was no mains water, no mains electricity. There was nothing much to do unless you're into birds or seals. But Tim was there one time, and he was a bit young and reckless in those days, and thought it would be a great idea to borrow somebody's boat and go out and try and ring some wading birds on Middle Isle, another island. So he and a friend got into this boat. It wasn't really seaworthy. It tipped over almost as soon as they got in, and they were swept out into the Irish Sea. Very luckily, there happened to be another bird watcher on the island who was a former seaman and knew exactly what to do. So went into our house, phoned the Coast Guard, and then broke into the Coast Guard lookout on the island. But the inshore lifeboat just happened to be on exercise in the river, and they headed out to try and find Tim and his friend, but they couldn't see them because they were so low in the water. But the guy found a flare in the lifeboat look round and set it off, and apparently it was so close to the bodies that Tim could remember this sort of flecks of light coming down on them, and they were picked up and they were saved. So that gave me an extra 40 years of laughter and adventure and time with him. So I'm very fond of them. But I did want to get some up-to-date details, and I went and spoke to the Cullercoats lifeboat, which is very close to where I live, to a young woman who is the helm, who drives it. And any of the details of the lifeboat rescue really came from her. And for me, looking at the boat, I didn't ask to go out in it. I get very seasick. And just standing on the beach watching this lifeboat go out, and bounces and bucks like some sort of fairground like ride. There's no way I could go out, but I did talk to her a lot about it.
Yeah, yes. Well, there have to be some limits to research, don't there? We don't
Yeah, I
know
think
it
so.
after all. And you dedicated the book to the lifeboat people as well, haven't you? So that's a lovely tribute.
Yeah, because in the UK, I think it's different in the US, but in the UK, they are all volunteers. So they're
Yeah.
volunteer crews. The lifeboat operations manager who organises the shout is a volunteer. The maintenance people and the fundraisers are all volunteers. So yes, they need our money.
Yes, it's a charity that needs a lot of support. You're absolutely right there. And it's great to think that this book may help the RNLI to continue and to do more of that great work. So I think that's rather wonderful. Now, I wanted to ask you about a term that you and I have talked about in the past. You actually wrote a wonderful essay for a book called How Done It, and the subject was human geography, and this is something that's reflected in your interest in landscape as well as character. And I think it's relevant to all of your books. It's certainly relevant to the Raging Storm. So could you tell us a little bit, please, about human geography? What is it?
Human geography. Well, my daughter, my youngest daughter, is an academic, and she's a senior lecturer in human geography. That's her subject, and it's looking at the individual within their landscape and within their community. So it is geography, but it's also a bit of sociology, I guess. And I believe that we are a product of where we grew up, of place, really, of the kids that we played with in the street and the view that we see from our window, and very much the community that we belong to is what makes us who we are. And I don't think as a writer we can understand the characters that we're developing if we don't understand that place. So I always start with place when I write a book. It's always place that feeds in. And there are certain people who can only come from certain places. So I don't think Vera Stanhope could have come from anywhere but the Northumberland Hills with those big skies. And she has literally and metaphorically the long view. She can see so far. So I think, yeah, and I think there are some stories that really can only come from certain places. So I couldn't transfer a story that when I'm writing about Shetland south, because there's just people have very different preoccupations, and any sort of story about fishing or oil could only really be set in Shetland.
Yes, absolutely. I think the Raging Storm really does reflect that unique characteristic of that part of England. And I wanted to ask you also about something we've often discussed: Golden Age detective fiction. You actually reference it early on in the book, and you refer to Dorothy L. Sayers, one of the great writers of the Golden Age, someone we both greatly admire. And I did feel when I read the book that in many ways the storyline and the resolution is one of your most intricate, if not the most intricate that I can think of. And it's very Golden Agey, it seems to me. Not in terms of the tropes, there's no locked rooms or anything like that, but the intricacy of it. And I wondered if that was a conscious decision or just something that grew out of your interest in the particular characters.
Yeah, nothing I do is particularly conscious. I just tell the story that I'm telling at the time. And in a way, it's maybe quite an adventure story because it is about superstition, and there's a background of the wreckers that brought the boats in. But I think you're right, and the one incident that you mentioned is a folded up train ticket is stopped to wedge a sash window to stop it from rattling, and you'll know what book that was in because I can't remember. It's one where Wimsey's brother is accused of murder, and again there's that little. Yeah. So I just nicked it, really.
Excellent. Well, I very much enjoyed that, and I'm sure thousands of readers will as well. I also wanted to ask you something about one of the themes of the book, which we've spoken about previously. The victim, and we're going to have to be very careful because this is in an intricate story. We don't want to give away spoilers because we want people to be excited as they reach the end of the novel. But it's no spoil to say that the murder victim is a character, an adventurer called Jem Roscoe, and he's a very charismatic individual, and there's something about charisma that is a bit of a theme in this particular story, I think. And I wondered if you'd like to speak to that.
Yeah, I think at one place in the book, Matthew Venn has been told by his superintendent that as a leader, as a team leader, he should have a bit more charisma, that he's lacking it. And Matthew sees that almost as a badge of honor. He thinks that police officers shouldn't seek to have big personalities, that what they need is intellectual rigor and honesty. And I think this book is a bit about, I hope it's not a boring book, but a celebration of the boring, the celebration of people who are prepared to do the work, do the boring stuff. Celebrities aren't always useful, but the people who are prepared to do that day-to-day stuff and work their way through the policing, I think, are very useful. So yeah, I think that's what I was trying to do with that we can get seduced by personality and charisma, and sometimes it's quite dangerous.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating theme, and it's reflected in the storyline, as I say, in a number of ways that we won't go into, but I think very, very interestingly indeed. It's a terrific read. It isn't at all boring. It's not at all dull. It draws you in, and we follow the characters, and then there is a further crime committed about halfway through the book, and various consequences flow from that. And dogged Matthew gets there in the end. Despite this alleged lack of charisma, he gets there. So it all works out in the
he is seduced for a moment by somebody else's personality, though, and that's quite interesting, isn't it? That we can all fall victim to believe what we want to believe sometimes.
Absolutely, I think it's really nicely done. Now we're going to come to questions from our audience. As I said, we've got a lot of them, so we'll try to get through as many as we can. But just before we do that, one thing I wanted to mention, I'll try and remember to mention it later, is that if you bought tickets, which include a copy of the book, The Raging Storm, with a book plate signed by, and those will be available, all being well, within 8 to 10 business days. And if you want more copies of the book, Christmas isn't too far away, then you can get them from bn.com, or you can do that 24/7. Any time of the day or night, you can pick up a copy of The Raging Storm, or you can go into one of the Barnes and Noble stores. And of course, we hope that you'll do that in large numbers. Now, I've asked a number of questions, so it's time to give our audience members a chance. And I have to start with one particular question, which greatly appealed to me, from Bonnie Morris, which asks quite simply, are you a descendant of Anne of Cleeves?
No, I'm not. I married Cleeves. My parents weren't that cruel. And we have done a little bit of digging into the background, and mostly we were farm labourers. We weren't anybody important at all. So farm labourers from the West Country is where most of my descendants come from. Most of my ancestors come from.
Well, I think it has to be that crime writing royalty for sure. So there's no doubt. and some of our audience may not be aware that Anne was appointed an officer of the British Empire, an OBE, a year or two ago. So that was a great honour as well. One of the other questions I wanted to ask right at the outset, nice question from Perveen Tariq, which is this: how old were you when you wrote your first book?
The first book came out in 1986. I was 32. That one, yeah, I was 32. So that's why I've written so many books. I have been going for quite a long time. It's not that I'm overly prolific. I really can't imagine writing more than one book a year. But yeah, I was quite young when I started.
And did you write any before then that weren't published or weren't submitted?
No, that was the first book I finished. And it was I started writing it while we were in Hilbury, because that was the island, because there was nothing much else to do. I stopped work when Tim nearly killed himself by drowning and thought he wasn't fit to be left alone there. So that's when I started writing. So maybe his accident actually prompted my writing. It is no coincidence that the first novel, in the first novel, I kill off a bird watcher. Saved our marriage, probably.
He was an absolutely passionate and very well respected ornithologist, wasn't he? And it's a wonderful book about birds that I've used as a reference from time to time. It's terrific. Now I wanted to move to a question from A.D. Kurtanich. I hope I'm pronouncing the surnames right, but forgive me if I don't. When developing a new character, what is your process?
I don't analyze what I do really, and characters come in different forms. So with Vera, the Crowtrap wasn't going to have a detective in it. The Crowtrap is the first Vera book, and it was never intended to have a detective in it. But I really got stuck with the plot. And Raymond Chandler said, if you're stuck with a plot, have a guy burst through a door with a gun. But I don't really do guns because it takes too much research. But I was writing a funeral scene. I thought I'd just have the door burst open. And in came Vera Stanhope. And just miraculously, as characters, as you know, sometimes do. I had her name. I described her as looking more like a bag lady than a detective. She's got all her notes, not in a briefcase, but in a plastic supermarket carrier bag. And there she was, fully formed. Yeah, Jimmy Perez came because, again, it was going to be a standalone novel, that first book, Raven Black. And it's a book about what it is to belong and what it is to be an outsider. And so I wanted someone who belonged, but it didn't quite. So I made him a Fair Islander. And I gave him that Spanish name and Mediterranean good looks to make him a bit different. And there was a Spanish Armada ship wrecked off Fair Isle in Shetland. So it's not outside the bounds of possibility. There were 60 survivors, that one of those men married a local woman and that the name continued down the line.
Absolutely. And in some ways, that was your breakthrough book, wasn't it? Was that one, The Gold Dagger, from the crime writer?
Absolutely. It was my breakthrough book. And I think just, again, a lot of luck came into it, because at the time, Scandi Noir was quite big in the UK, and there's nowhere really as Scandi as Shetland. It belonged to Norway until the 15th century, and still has that sense of being a long way north. It is a long way north. Yeah. And for people who like the Shetland television series, they finished filming in June, and so it should be broadcast fairly soon, I think.
Fantastic. Now, a question from Maureen Corwin. Your writing's so atmospheric, your characters so different, interesting, and complex. Your mystery is so well developed. How do you do it? How do you keep track of it all with your different series?
I think the skill that we need as writers often is concentration rather than imagination. So we create this world in our head, and I think we need to believe it and see it and live in it while we're writing. And that's why I can't write for more than 12 or 1,500 words a day, because after that I start to lose concentration and I lose that sense of where I am in the book and what I'm doing. So I think that's how I do it. And it takes maybe 9 months to write a book, and all that time I'm with it. And sometimes I put in too much detail, and the editors have to tell me, to take it out because it's a bit confusing for people. And sometimes I can see it so clearly that I forget to tell readers things. And that's why an editorial team is so important, because we both do it. We're so close to the book when we're writing that you forget to.
Well, you do, and even when someone is as experienced as you are, I think it always helps to have another eye and constructive comment, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I have two sets of eyes, because my US and my British editors work together, so I get one set of notes, and that's great.
I had another question from Jill Scott, which is connected to the previous one. How do you keep all the characters in your books straight? Do you sometimes have to look things up to check you're getting things right?
No, you see, I'm really lazy. So all the things that I ought to do, like make notes about when they were born and what they're doing, I don't do. So sometimes, and now, of course, I have a really great copy editor who checks continuity and all that sort of stuff. But when I started, I didn't. And that's why Joe's wife in the Vera books, she starts off, I think, as Sarah and becomes Sal later on. So, but Sal is a kind of diminutive name for Sarah. It's kind of nickname for Sarah. So I reckon that's okay.
Yeah.
But it's just me being too idle to go back and check.
If it was good enough for Conan Doyle, it's good enough for the rest of us, I guess, isn't it? Now, Kimberly Lissanby Barber asks this question: is it your plan, as best as you can judge, continue the Matthew Venn series as the others, and are the new ones in the Vera series in particular brewing in your mind?
The new Vera is finished. It's being edited at the moment, and that'll come out next September, I guess. And yes, I definitely will be writing more about Matthew Venn. So I think if you get to the end of the book, you get a sense of the arc of the story and where it might be going next. So there will be more Matthew Venn.
Yes, there's a hint there, and we will say no more than that. But yes, interesting. No. Now, Karen has asked a question. Karen Wakefield: is there any possibility you'd write a book featuring the main characters from your books in collaboration? For instance, Vera with Matthew Venn.
No, I think that would be really confusing. I would get a bit lost then. People ask me that, and sometimes I say, well, we might bring them together for a sort of comic relief fundraising TV show, but that would be it, just for a sketch, maybe, but certainly not in serious books.
Right, so that's the answer there. Now Susan Garnalski has asked a number of questions. One or two we've already touched on. She points out quite rightly you've got a number of very strong women characters in your stories. Is there anyone who they're based on?
I think Vera is based on, I was born in the mid-50s, so not that long after the war. And in the small town where I lived, there were some formidable spinsters, single women, and who'd either lost sweethearts during the war or who had taken on roles and responsibility during the war and were reluctant to give them up. And certainly in the UK in the 1950s, if you're a teacher and you got married, you had to give up work because there were men who were coming back who needed jobs. And I think there were quite a number of these women who decided they'd rather be single than 1950s housewives. And they were hospital matrons, and they were teachers, and they were librarians. So I think she is based very much on those women who were strong, authoritative, competent, didn't feel they needed a man in their life, and didn't care at all what they looked like. The war, I can remember dreadful tweed skirts with frayed hems and thick stockings and sensible shoes. So I think that's where she grew from. Yeah.
Fascinating. It's remarkable to think how the world has changed since then, isn't it? But you're absolutely right. And women teachers who married lost their jobs. It
Yeah.
was extraordinary. That was the rule in Britain anyway at the time. Now, Janice Denny has asked a question, wondering if your friendships with other authors, such as Louise Penny, impact or improve your writing or plot creating.
I think every book that we read is research in a way, because we're understanding the craft better. So yeah, certainly Louise has been a wonderful friend to me, and we've toured together, and she's toured here with me. But in the UK, I'm a member of something called Murder Squad, which is a group of writers. We all work together. Martin is another member. And we came together a long time ago now. We're set up by the idea came from a woman called Margaret Murphy, because we were all getting good reviews, doing all right, but just not getting the sales that we felt that would be quite handy. We all had to have a second job at that, a real day job at that point as well. And so I think collaboration is a great thing. So we're still running after more than 20 years, 22 years now, I think. Yeah. The squad has been going, and we still get together for events and to support each other.
That is very true, and yes, we've far outlasted the Beatles, so that is something to the Murder Squad for sure. Now, another question. Denise Ferguson asks if, given the number of fictional characters that you've created, how do you know when the time comes to retire them by not continuing the series? Can a character so exhaust you that you have a mad desire to knock them off in a final book? That's what Denise wants to know.
Yeah, I think maybe she's thinking about Jimmy Perez, who I'm not writing about. Well, certainly not writing about Shetland anymore. And that, I think, was again about the place. I'd written 8 books set in Shetland. There are only, I think, 21,000 people live in all the islands. I killed off a few, and the BBC, with their original stories, killed off an awful lot more. So I thought maybe it was time to stop. But the BBC is still continuing.
That's right. And that began as a quartet, didn't it? And then the books were so successful.
That's right.
So you never know.
Yeah, so successful, but also because I still have things to say about Shetland then, I think. So
yeah. Well.
But yeah, I might bring him back in a short story or something.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
I haven't killed him off.
Well, no Reichenbach Falls for Jimmy. Thank goodness. And one thing to say is that Anne's fantastic short story writer and has been for many years. So if you come across her short stories, do take a look at them, because they're absolutely terrific. Some of them feature characters like Vera, but there are plenty of standalones as well, and very varied, very interesting indeed. Now, Cindy Steinbrugger has asked this question: which mystery authors influenced you when you were growing up? And I'm guessing you're going to say not Agatha Christie.
I am going to say not Agatha Christie. No, I know you're a huge Christie fan, Martin, but I never was. I think she, I think she's really cold and ruthless. I want someone with a bit of heart and a bit of warmth, and I don't think she is. She kills schoolgirls, and I know you're a great fan of the book, And Then There Were None, but I think it's absolutely horrible. I think it's any story that's just based on the emotion of revenge has nothing going for it. So we'll leave it there. I did say this at the Christie Festival last weekend as well. I'm not sure how well that went, but I love the other Golden Age women writers, especially like Dorothy Sayers, Marjorie Allingham. I think it's very good at creating. Marjorie Allingham especially creates a world that's unique within the novel. And Nia Marsh is quite fun too. Her Roderick Allain books are really interesting. So those, but then if we jump a bit further forward, I was very influenced, I think, by Ruth Rendell and P.D. James, who were writing in the 70s, 80s. But perhaps before other people quite got into them, I love translated crime fiction. And anybody who wants to write crime, I think, should read Simonov. I think his Maigret books are terrific. They're just so tight and clear, very, very short, but every word has a purpose in them. I think he's terrific.
Yeah, amazing writer and amazingly prolific in all sorts of ways. Now, I think we know the answer to this one already, but I'll ask the question anyway. Ellen Young says, are you going to write any more Vera Stanhope books? Well, we know that you finished one that's yet to be published. Are there any more after that?
Yes, I hope so. Vera is aging in real time. I have more sense than Ian Rankin. I did say I was on a panel with Ian at a book festival once and said that I was planning to stop writing Shetland. And he looked at me and said, well, good luck with that. Because, of course, he tried to end the Rebus books and kept having to bring them back and getting more and more older, more and more frail. So no, Vera isn't aging in real time. And I've just seen somebody ask the name of the last writer that I mentioned, Simonov, George Simonov, who wrote the Maigret books.
Yeah, great Belgian writer, and also wrote tons of standalone books.
He did, but they were dark, really darker psychological novels.
Oh yeah, well. yeah. The Man Who Watched Trains, that sort of thing. Now, in the Raging Storm, there's a character. She's involved with lifeboats called Mary Ford, and we've got a good question here from Fran Weiser, and Mary has a son who suffers from a condition called Jesper-Langham syndrome. And what Fran asks is, how did you choose that condition? What's the story there?
It's fictitious. I didn't want to use a real condition, but because I think that would be very upsetting if you were reading it. But I did talk to a mutual friend of ours, James Geve. His wife is a pediatrician, and spoke to them both. James is a forensic pathologist who advises crime writers, and he's a great friend of mine, and so is Nicola, his wife. So I was talking to Nicola about possible illnesses that would seem to be terminal. And she suggested, she gave me hints, but I didn't want to call it a real name, so I made it the name up.
That's right. I realised that when I was going through the book. I'm very curious, never heard of it, so I googled it, and the only references were to your book. So at that point, I realised that.
I didn't want to use a real thing that might upset parents.
I can understand that absolutely. Well, Catherine Bruger asks a nice question: how can you write so many books and still keep the characters so interesting and evolving?
Oh, well, that's just a lovely compliment. I don't know. I love it. See, I really enjoy the writing. I'm sitting at my kitchen table now, and I love sitting here early in the morning, drinking lots of tea and making stuff up. And when you've written as many books as we have, I think, and when we know the characters so well, it's really like writing from memory rather than imagination. So it's not hard to go back and write about these people because we know them, we've lived with them for such a long time. Yeah. Somebody has asked about the spelling of Simonov, Simenon, Simonov. He's Belgian. Yeah. So you should be able to get it now.
Yeah. Great writer. Strongly recommended. Now, Anna Pierce has asked a question about research. Do you research true crimes to guide your book? If so, how much time does it take for one book? Lastly, do you have a criminal justice degree? That's Anna's set of questions about true crime.
Right, I don't have any sort of degree. I am a university dropout. perhaps shouldn't admit to that. But I do have three very good friends. James Geve, who I just mentioned, who is a forensic pathologist. Helen Pepper is a crime scene manager, and Professor Lorna Dawson, who is a forensic soil scientist. And they're all so approachable and so great. So my research really is asking them, what would you do if? But really, I follow the John Mortimer, who wrote the Rumpole books. His advice was always write the book first and do the research after. Because if you write the story first, you're not weighed down with chunks of very interesting research that you feel obliged to put in. And you don't waste a lot of time because you know where your gaps of knowledge are. So I follow his advice and do it that way. I know some people love doing the research, but I just like telling stories.
Absolutely. Now, Joanne Moffat asks a question about TV. Have you ever considered making cameo appearances in the Colin Dexter style in TV shows based on your books?
No, because it's boring. I go on set and it's lovely and I see the team and I catch up with friends, but they take so long to do. You know, a 2-minute shot on television probably takes half a day to do because they're taking it from different camera angles and then they have to rehearse. And then, so usually I go at lunchtime and I eat with them and I don't have to stand around in the wet and the cold. So I'm just looking at the time. We got time for one or two more, Martin?
Excellent. One or two more. Yes, we're coming towards the end. I have paraphrased some of these questions, and one or two of you, please appreciate that Anne has seen all these questions, so she's picked up the lovely compliments you've given, even if I've not read all of them out, just to select. Amy 40 wants to know, what are your thoughts on too dark or too cozy, and finding the right note that represents you to readers?
I think I write the sort of book that I would enjoy reading. So I don't want anything that's too sentimental. I don't want something that I don't believe in, but I don't want to read gratuitous violence either. I mean, sometimes I can read it. I've just read the latest Irvine Welsh, the guy that wrote Train Spotting, which is very, very violent, but it's so interesting and thought-provoking that I did read it right to the end because I got caught up in it. But usually, so yeah, I'll write the sort of book that I want to read.
Super.
And that's about, and actually the murder isn't that important always. What's more important are the writing within the structure of traditional crime fiction liberates me to explore the things that I want to write about. I don't have to think about the plot because in a sense, the plot is a given, isn't it? There's a murder, there's a limited number of suspects, and there's a resolution. And I think the wonderful Katrina McPherson said it's not a straitjacket, it's like a corset to give you structure and to keep you upright. And but so I'm liberated then to look at the things that I am most interested in, which is about families and what keeps them together and what makes them fall apart, and communities and what keeps them together and makes them fall apart. So that's what I enjoy doing. That's what I write.
Yeah, you did so well. Two more questions before we wrap up for today. Carol Barnes wants to know this. Living by bodies of water is important to your characters. Is it important to you as well?
Absolutely. I feel much safer on the edge. I start to get a bit itchy if I move inland. So no, I need to be by the coast. That's my very happiest place.
Yes, and you live in Whitley Bay.
Preferably an island, but here in Whitley Bay is almost as good.
Super. And last but by no means least, Lisa DeGrow wants to know, what are you currently reading?
At the moment, I'm reading a new Louise Welsh, who is a brilliant Scottish writer. It's a proof called Gone to the Dogs, I think. But just before that, I really want to recommend the new Tess Gerritsen called Spy Coast, which I think is so clever. It's about a group of retired spies living on the Maine coast of Maine, New England. But they've got such exotic backgrounds that they bring with them, and they have to go back to work to find out what's going on when a body is left on the drive of one of their houses.
Fantastic. And one question
hugely entertaining.
One question has popped up in the chat, which I have to ask it, which is this: are you planning to write a personal memoir?
No, I can't do non-fiction. I wrote a book about Shetland, and I find facts really unforgiving. I would just turn it into a story. I would start telling lies. It would be no good.
I'm sure it would be, but even so, thanks so much, Anne. It's been wonderful to have a chance to chat with you yet again, and we've chatted in so many times.
No, thank you for your wonderful questions, and thanks to everybody who came along on this lunchtime and chatted to us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the team who set this up. Thanks to the publishers, as well as to Barnes and Noble. And as I said before, the book, if you've ordered it as part of the arrangements with B&N, will be with you in 8 to 10 business days. You can get your extra copies from bn.com or by popping into your local Barnes and Noble store. So that's the commercial. The book is The Raging Storm by Anne Cleeves, and it's been great to chat to you again. Thanks very much, and good evening.
Thank you. And you might want to look out for Martin's books as well, because he does all right.
Thank you.
How many Edgars have you got, Martin?
2.
Yeah.
Yes.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.